celebrity gossip, which ties in with the real social function of gossip, I think. It is a rehearsal of what we value and what we disvalue.
It had like this sticky character to it of like, oh, it seems that it's something that involves us all. And it goes back to what you said, is like, okay, but why do these two people who are celebrities? And
it sort of got everyone's attention, everyone around you. And that's almost more surprising than, the show is being put on in the first place. There have been a lot of people who are trying to write articles about how this relates to, the Me Too movement, or how it relates to these ideological ideas. But
hello and welcome to Paying Attention with me, Nicholas Gruen. I will introduce myself briefly and say that I'm an Australian economist, and I'm with two friends of mine. I'm easily the oldest of these two friends of mine, so I'm not sure what that has to recommend me, but that's something that jumps out at me, having just turned 65, I'm afraid. Peyton Bowman is my American friend in Japan, and right. Isabella Perez is my Venezuelan friend in Korea. We are South Korea, I might add.
Yes.
It might be a bit hard to have quite such good communication with her if she was in the other Korea. Anyway, I decided that, or Peyton and I decided that it would be fun to talk about the shenanigans, the excitement, the cultural excitement of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard court case. And so that's what we're going to do. And I'll hand over to Peyton to get us going.
Yeah, so very simply, why is this case, Depp versus Heard, getting everyone so worked up? And I mean, what's at stake? These are two celebrities who have very little in common with most people. Why are we so interested in what's going on there?
I guess
direct this to you, Nicholas. Yeah.
Okay, so I can speak for myself, and I always get. I've always been fascinated, not exactly by culture war, but by culture. In other words, what does our culture stand for? What gets us going? What do we? What makes us feel, proud and ashamed and all of those kinds of things. And so some people will say this is just celebrity gossip. I think there's much more at stake than that, because it's celebrity gossip which ties in with what gossip, what the real social function of gossip, I think, is. It is a rehearsal of what we value and what we disvalue, what we think people should be proud of, what people should be ashamed of. And so we say to them, you should be proud of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself. I'm proud of you. I'm ashamed of you. So this is certainly a soap opera, certainly an extraordinary theatrical presentation to us about what these people have been up to. And then there's the deep undercurrents of feminism in our culture, which is, getting on well over 100 years and keeps going through different kinds of cycles, and we keep having to sort ourselves out about according to what we think about it. So it raises all of those sorts of questions. So that's a reasonable start, I think, as to why this event in front of us, which we all kind of want to talk about and comment on, why it's important to us, and why I think it should be important to us. So, what do you think, Isabella? What do you think of my summary, or what makes you, if you are interested in it, what makes you interested in it?
I mean, it's interesting for me because I don't think I spend much time, if any, in social media and things, and I was kind of very disconnected. Also, I guess being in Korea has that benefit to not pay too much attention about what's going on in the US, but what got me somewhat interested is the fact that everyone around me seemed to be interested. It seemed to be like this. It's not a cultural phenomena, but definitely this. It had like this sticky character to it of like, oh, it seems that it's something that involves us all. And it goes back to what you said, is like, okay, but why do these two people who are celebrities and have like such distant lives from the 99.9% of people on this planet, why is it something that is so attractive? And I'm not entirely sure why, but I think it's what you said. It's pulling a lot of strings. It's talking about, it has those things in relations to feminism and the Me Too movement and things like this, but at the same time is, maybe it's also been like like extra dramatized for like harvesting and entertainment, and it is a way to keep people. I guess it is a way to make, I don't know, to harvest attention. So I'm not entirely sure, but it definitely feels, I mean, like everything, honestly. I think everything is very complex and related to a lot of things, but this particular one seems to be pulling a lot of strings. Because there's also, I guess, like the theme of the, not revenge, but definitely like it has a history. It's been going on for a while. So I think there's also that, like the vindication aspect to it, which I think a lot of people are drawn to for some reason. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think something that both of y'all are saying kind of jumps out at me. I like this comparison between gossip and also I think, Isabella, you kind of touch on the same thing from a different angle, in that it's just sort of got everyone's attention, everyone around you, and that's almost more surprising than, that it's being sort of the show is being put on in the first place. And I think there's a kind of very practical element to this attention. I mean, of course, and I think we might talk about this later, there have been a lot of people who are trying to write articles about how this relates to, the Me Too movement, or how it relates to these ideological ideas. But there's a sense in which we're all kind of drawn to this because it just resembles, maybe at a higher level, but a way of sort of restating kind of fairly practical values through gossip. And kind of allowing us to engage in a conversation that's more, that in a way is kind of grounded in a sense.
So, it's grounded. It's funny, the celebrities themselves don't sound terribly grounded.
Well.
And what is grounded, and again, we might want to talk about this later, but one of the things that's grounded is that these people find themselves in a court of law. And a court of law is almost the last institution we have that has a pretty uncompromising attitude to the truth. You're right or you're wrong, or you're lying or you're not lying. And most people don't have that experience in life. After they go, you might get that experience before the headmaster in a school or something, but after that, you don't really get it. And everyone is spinning. You spin to get a job. You are brought before the people interviewing you, and you are the supplicant. You are saying, "Look, I'm very good. Employ me." And when they ask you these questions, like, "Well, what's that classic question? What are your weaknesses or something?" The smart people have worked out that they've already prepared the answer, which is a thoroughly dishonest answer, to get them through a ridiculous question, because here you are, the answer should be something like, ask a silly question, get a silly answer. And so here you are in this theatre where if you say something in a group of people and a number of people notice that you're lying, they probably won't say, hang on a minute, 2 weeks ago you said that. What is it? They might note that you're lying, but they won't make an issue of it because that's a way to lose friends. So you're in this very unusual and very grounded in that sense situation where you cannot tell a lie, or you take your life in your hands when you just say stuff. So that to me is quite fascinating. In Australia, we have, like I think everywhere else, you have government inquiries all the time, and they just get held and ignored. And so we have super inquiries, which we call a royal commission, and they're run by lawyers. And they cost literally 10 times as much, sometimes 100 times as much. And they cross-examine people. Now, I was actually on an Australian government body that did inquiries. It wasn't a legal body, but it actually had powers of discovery. We never used them. But anyway, we use the law as this final theatre where you kind of in trouble if you don't tell the literal truth. So that's a pretty interesting place for people to find themselves in.
Yeah, that stood out to me. What you said is like, maybe that's the same thing that is I think attractive, is this, yeah, like relationships, like human relationships are complicated. They're not like, it's not something you can like clearly define and like this, what is right or not right or wrong, but I guess like there's always too much context and too much happening to have like such a clear verdict, I guess. And I mean, that's why you go to court for this kind of stuff. And I guess the spectators, the audience, the people who are watching this might be drawn to that as well, to like you said, it's this last stage where you get to see like clearly defined, he did right, they did wrong, this is correct, this is wrong, like these very clear definitions of what is true and what is not, what is accepted and what is not accepted, like a very kind of, I don't want to say binary, but that you can see that like there is like one thing or the other. In this kind of like contrast between one thing that is not the other doesn't happen so easily, I think, in most spheres of life, like you said, because everyone is running complicated experiences. So that's what stood out the most to me when you were talking about this, is like there's something about the clearly defined boundaries of what is, I don't know, right or wrong, I guess, or lying or not lying, or whatever it is that they're measuring in this kind of courts, that I think must be an attractor for people, is my instinct.
Yeah, well, I think that's it's really interesting, because there is this way in which the court and its final decision adds this clarity to things. But as we know,
I'll just interrupt there and say that's when I heard the court. I mean, the court, the sort of end of the case as read out by the judge, and the jury says, yes and no. It's very stark, because here's this incredibly complex, seething social situation, and then there are 9 questions, yes or no, and then the jury says, was this person maliciously defamed, or whatever the question is, according to the law, yes or no? Did she have this defense, yes or no? And it's sort of quite shocking. It's kind of good. It's also not good, because human relations can't be summarized into yes and no. However, I mean, I'm no fan of Amber Heard, but I'm sure that there's more to it than that she's bad and Johnny's good. Yeah. Johnny's pretty obviously got some issues. Anyway, that's what that's how it ends up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, and I think that's what's also interesting, in that we had this kind of topic that we were in a way gossiping about, it arrives at a decision in you know, like you say, 9 questions. But then there's this political commentary around this, and there are a lot of journalists and writers who are trying to make it, maybe take it away from that place of away from that place of gossip, but also from that place of justice, and at least justice in the sense of a court kind of justice.
Yeah.
And they want to bring in slogans like the "Believe women, believe all women." Has this undermined the Me Too movement? Has this or is this showing in a way that men are being kind of poorly represented by this movement, because men can also at times suffer abuse and other things? And so I'm kind of would be curious, Isabella, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think about this political dimension of, or this? I don't know. Let's say we have the gossip, we have the court stuff. I don't know how we would define these spheres, and then there's the slogans, or as Nicholas might say, the sloganization. Maybe is one of your idols of the mind of this sort of thing. But this category of things,
I mean, yeah, as just like me as an individual, my first thought is like, how can anyone take just like one single instance of this happening and then make that like the answer to absolutely everything else? That seems absolutely absurd. And yet it is somewhat happening, right? Like people are seeing this one single case as an not even an example, just like as somehow a template for every other relationship that has similar like implications, and it's very tricky. Like I said, I don't spend too much time on social media. I don't know exactly what the conversations are, but I have a hard time seeing how, I don't know, how this would be like particularly detrimental to the Me Too movement. What would that even mean? Like, what is detrimental to the Me Too movement? Like, prove that it has some basis that need some deep questioning and reshuffling, or does that mean that now people are actually going to be like, okay, wait, no, we have to start questioning the things that we never questioned before? Because that if they just like flip it, right? Before it was like, well, okay, Me Too says we have to believe all women no matter what, right away, without questioning them, because they haven't been heard enough, so we have to believe them right away. And if this suddenly becomes an instance of like, oh no, then like just how can I say this? Like, if people are not gonna, if the conclusion from this is not gonna be like, hey, these absolute extreme like ways of seeing a like shape, like synthesizing the context and just like reducing it into like all or nothing, always or never, like these kind of like I said before, it's just like these negations, like it's either one or the other. If the result of this is just going to be like the opposite of believe all women, then I think it's doing absolutely nothing. But I do sense some people might take it that way. I think, I don't know if we're going to talk about that later on, but there's been people, I think, when people, I don't know, I talked to some friends who were talking about like the men's rights and the manosphere and whatever that is, and like, yeah, there's some voices there who might be thinking like, oh yeah, this is proof that was wrong. And I don't think it's proof that was wrong. Like, of course, Me Too came out of something that had real concerns and real intentions, and it's just like, it seems like when you reduce, I guess if I try to make a point, I guess my point is that if you reduce the complexity of everything to like a simple heuristic about how you like can judge people based on like 2 or 3 traits or whatever, then it's bound to end up pretty bad, because situations are just so different, and we need to be able to have that ability to question things, I think. that's also concerning to me, like the fact that people don't seem to be questioning. They just like take in and follow, like they accept whatever's happening and then they just act on it. And there's that moment of doubt, that moment of questioning is important. I think that's where we as humans get to exercise, like, I don't know, like true participation and judgment and things that are important, I think, to be like a truly, I don't know, responsible, active, developed person. And if we reduce everything to just like, oh yeah, this quick heuristic that you can just like act on right away without having to actually get to know the people or get to know the context or get to understand what's going on, that's pretty dangerous, I think. And I will have to see what happens with this, but hopefully it's not just like the same thing but the other way around, because that would not be good, I think.
So I think it seemed to me, I mean, I thought this all along, that the Me Too movement was great because it was undoing a really horrible situation and started amping up the risks for men in behaving in the way that Harvey Weinstein behaved. So that's fantastic. Unfortunately, if you are doing political combat in our system, you do slogan combat. And it's a perfectly, it's also extremely worth saying that one of the things that was happening was that women were being traduced in all kinds of ways when they would make accusations of sexual harassment and all the rest of it. And you'd have to say, why would they do that if they weren't, if they didn't have good cause? So that's a good readjustment. Unfortunately, to say believe all women is just completely absurd. There are some women you won't be able to believe. And the more you just swing the pendulum in that direction, the more you create opportunities for women to exploit those things. As we heard Amber Heard say to Johnny Depp, you see if the jury's going to believe that I was abusive, that you were that I was the abuser and you weren't. And that's going to happen, and you have to have a public discourse that can allow for that, but we don't, in a way, or we don't. When you're doing political combat, you don't do any of that. You just have a slogan, and then you just wait around until the bubble bursts. And that is one of the things that I've found. I haven't sort of read vast amounts on this. I haven't read a really good piece about Heard and Depp, this case. And the two pieces I have read are both by women, and they're both a kind of hand-wringing exercise saying, gee, this is terrible because it will be so harmful to the Me Too movement. Well, then there's pretty obviously something wrong with the Me Too movement or wrong with the situation, because I've got a lot of sympathy. If people are in political battle, they use the tools at their disposal, and one of them is a slogan. So I'm not really trying to blame them. But if you're pushing towards a situation dedicated to a proposition that makes no sense, your bubble will burst. And given that I could see that coming and any bunny could see it coming, you should be ready for it. You should be preparing people for it. I don't know. I wonder how many card-carrying feminists who are campaigning for Me Too were quite bold in saying, by the way, these kinds of situations will occur and they should not be denied. And we will not be able to get what justice we can, because none of us are going to get that much justice in intimate relations from a court anyway. But we will not be able to get the justice that we seek if we don't recognise the most obvious cases for justice that make us a little bit uncomfortable. In other words, the woman didn't tell the truth. And I remember early on in the case, before the jury had spoken, where a celebrity gossip columnist was on the Australian breakfast TV, and she said, well, of course, I believe all women. And then she went straight, but she then said, but I think Amber Heard was lying. And she wasn't trying to disguise she was trying to sort of brazen out the contradiction. It was kind of cute. But anyway, that's where we are.
Yeah. The other thing that I think happens with these kind of things is that it's not like explicitly stated, but somehow, and it doesn't have to be, but I think one thing that comes with believe all women is that you're implicitly saying distrust all men. Like it kind of like comes with it, right? It's not explicitly stated, but like if you believe all women, that means immediately you don't believe the man at all. And when you create like these, there's just no reconciliation. Like one cannot coexist with the other because one is the negation of the other entirely. And it's very, I've seen what this does. Like I used to have a roommate. And he said this, he was like, oh, I have like this difficulty relating with women because he is younger. He grew up, I think, in the midst of Me Too. So he wants to be careful about everything, right? But then he also recognizes how he questions absolutely everything he does when it comes to relating with women because he doesn't know how it's going to come across. And it made me realize that, at least for him, like it puts him in this position of like, well, if you've been told, like if women are saying, oh, we are predated upon, then you're also saying all men are predator, right? So if you grew up with this idea that men are predatory or whatever, then that kind of reshapes your ability to see women as anything else other than something to like a victim. And it's very like tricky when people are stuck into like these it's not a character, but like these very limiting roles. And I know what you said, and it's true what you said. Like, of course, Me Too exists for a reason, and of course there is a history of women who have been through this kind of thing and weren't listened because there were certain men in power or certain situations that were not just ready or there for them. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't know how we can have more conversation and just the way that things are now. And I think that's the thing. I don't think this case is gonna, because maybe we're gonna talk about this later on, like what is the possible aftermath, or like what are the consequences other than possibly affecting Me Too? Is like, is this actually gonna be a net good? Like, is this actually gonna help things? Is this going to be a moment of like, oh, aha, yeah, okay, true, some women do lie. So maybe we have to like think about that again? Or is this just going to be adding even more fuel to the whole situation and going to like separate it even more? I hope that's not the case. I hope this can be a starting point for, I don't know, some conversation to happen, but I'm not seeing how that's going to go there.
So,
yeah.
So let me, maybe I'm going back to what we talked about earlier, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that in this situation, everyone, the game is, the idea of participating in the public conversation involves just taking a side. Almost everybody takes a side. Now, those two articles were written by women, feminists, who thought of themselves as fairly thoughtful people. So they weren't tweets, they weren't slogans particularly, but it really mattered to them that it was, they would say, you know, as a feminist, this sort of stuff. And so that was the most important thing, that they said what they wanted to say without people misunderstanding where they stood ideologically, which in some ways I think that's sort of the opposite of what I try and do. if people ask me to explain my ideology, I'll try and do my best. I'll say, I'm sort of, I think I'm here, like I'm way to the left in many ways in terms of analyses of what's wrong, or very unhappy about the way that I'm also somewhat to the right about what's wrong. In other words, I'm not sparing about how screwed things are, and I'm much less sure about exactly what that means and what side to take. Well, it's hard to take a side when nobody's really very convincing about what to do. That's the work we're supposed to do. So, and yet the conversation just never goes there. I mean, let me give you an example from a completely different environment. I got to my astonishment, I gave a speech. I wasn't astonished that I gave this speech, but I gave a speech on the memoirs. In fact, I'll be able to get it out of my book. I launched that book, which is the memoirs of an old family friend called Max Corden. And I gave a speech, and he's a trade theorist. And in the speech, I said he was the last, he was doing trade theory the last time it was relatively sane. And then it got overtaken by kind of mathematical craziness of various kinds, which I justified. And I mentioned Paul Krugman. And I'm a big fan of certain aspects of Paul Krugman. I was quite critical of Paul Krugman in this context. So lo and behold, I get up the next morning and someone texts me and says, Paul Krugman noticed. So Paul Krugman read my speech and wrote a blog post about what the hell was I going on about. So I went on to his website and I tried to say what I didn't really think Paul Krugman would pay me the time of day. But, of course, the comments thread was just full of Paul Krugman groupies. And who was I? I must be some right-wing guy trying to do what everybody does to Paul Krugman or whatever. And I just wasn't remotely like that. But it didn't matter. It just didn't matter what I said. That was what was going on. Now, this Johnny Depp and Amber Heard are rather more extreme in that regard, but it's exactly the same. You don't really venture out trying to make sense of things. You venture out like you would venture out to a sporting contest and you know which side you're on. And what the hell is the point of that? So firstly, you've got the economic incentives on Twitter and all these organizations to just ramp it all up. And I have a kind of a heuristic, which is that if we're going to get anywhere, we have to be able to make each other uncomfortable and ourselves uncomfortable, because all the comfortable bits, all the comfy chairs are taken. But if you try and do that, as I experienced this week, I sent you a link to this extraordinary pile-on I experienced on Twitter. And it's just sort of, the misunderstandings are kind of 10 layers deep. So you wouldn't try to explain to anyone. I mean, for instance, it was a 5-tweet quote and it was quoting someone else. And then I get literally over 500 comments attacking me as if it's me. Some of those I say, well, it wasn't me, but, most of the people aren't going to see that. No, almost nobody's read the 5 tweets. Someone even dug into the article I was quoting from and then did a sort of FBI, or not an FBI, a sort of a PR scan on what he'd written. And he was an academic, and he wrote an article called Love on Campus. And he was talking about Plato's Symposium and how eros was central to true teaching, and it wasn't sexual eros. It was the desire for, all this stuff. And it's not even very risque. But this guy puts up on Twitter a thing saying, well, there you are. This guy's quoting a guy who writes about love on campus. just outrageous. Now, of course, I didn't then say that's outrageous, you've just defamed someone, because then I just get another cascade of complete misunderstanding. And everyone, as you said, Peyton, what is it, the peanut gallery? Everyone eats their peanuts and tosses in a bit of abuse, and Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. There were a lot of interesting ones on there. There was one person actually figured out it was a quote, and then they got angry that you didn't put quotation marks, and that was like cause. And then there was another person who looked at your profile and said, well, I speak 4 languages, but I don't know what isegoria is, right? Which is on your profile. It refers to this equal speech that we have. And I thought, so well, who cares how many languages you speak if you don't know the language of the word that it's actually in? It doesn't make any difference. I mean, it was just so interesting. It was like, it's exactly like you say. People came out. They didn't feel like they could just sit there and say something that was neutral. Like I do think there was some of that stuff, and people were actually engaging with the article itself, but it got all mixed in with all this other stuff.
That's right. It started off. What happened is it started off. There was a bit of that, and then it just got blown away. Yeah, it just got blown away in the end.
And it gets all mixed up. So you see these people, and you realize, oh, they're not really attacking. They're not really attacking you here. They're actually talking about the article, but then it comes across as the whole discourse gets shaped into these two sides, and you have to kind of come and go into them. And the other, sorry to interrupt, but the other thing, it really is pretty outrageous. I'm really not personally upset. It was kind of fun, and my kids had a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun watching the fun that they had. But but look at this, nah, dude, you're just an asshole. Like, it's just so pathetic. And Twitter is there orchestrating this. While they tell us, no doubt they'll have, corporate social responsibility, and, they'll talk about not having misinformation, and which is a kind of somewhat ideologically biased version of misinformation anyway. But, I mean, I'm pleased they don't have complete batshit crazy conspiracy theories up there. But just sort of rank contentless abuse. I've just put in a search. 1, 2, 3. Nah, that's a disadvantage of your personally being a condescending asshole. Asshole. Yeah, look, it's really a lot, actually. It's much more than I thought. I'd never searched it before. So there were about 500 comments. I think more now. I think 700 or 800. There's about 15 that just go, well, you're an asshole. Well, I mean, the truth is, of course, I'm an asshole in some situations. Everyone is. But I'm not gonna say that to them. Well, what I do think is interesting is how this kind of discourse, it sort of unilaterally makes it. It sort of gets rid of the cooperative element in the way, Isabella, you were talking about your friend, and having been brought on, kind of come into the world or come into the social world under this idea that, you should always believe women, and that men are always bad. And then they see something like this Johnny Depp trial, and maybe they say something like, oh, I guess all those people were lying to me. Well, maybe I want to take a kind of nuanced view, but now there's no place in the middle for me to be. So I guess I'm going to kind of fall in with these people in the manosphere who are criticizing all this stuff. And I think it's tricky because, in a way, this whole case could certainly be forgotten, right? If people just treated it like gossip around the kitchen table. But but in any case, I mean, I think I am kind of curious to dig in a little bit, because there are clearly some misogynistic voices talking about this. There is that manosphere, or whatever it is, which has kind of come up, and in a way it's engaging in the debate on its own terms, and in ways that are probably just they're not helpful either. So I guess And you were saying you don't really engage in this social media, but do you see patterns of how other ways in which this is kind of being amplified by social media or kind of contemporary media, things along these lines?
I mean, the way I think it could be amplified, other than what Nicholas was saying, is that of course all these like I don't know, like the actual media, not only social media, the profits from like clicks and views and whatever are gonna like farm this for shape it in the most attractive way and like tap into people's most basic desires and I don't know ways to grab attention. But one thing that kind of sounded is similar to something I wanted to say is you said like you see a lack of collaboration, right? Like you like at least Twitter, from what I understand, it and at least what's happening with Nicholas, right? Like all these people saying, well, you're an asshole. It's like, okay, and what is this? It's like it's just a statement. It's not a conversation. It's not leading to anywhere. You're not even showing me that you actually listen to me. Like all those elements that are part of debate and part of like agreement and part of conciliation and part of like this back and forth, that is the way you actually come to a compromise and a decision between different parties that everyone participated in, and maybe like it's not the best for everyone, it's like the best result that works for everyone. It might not be like the most optimal solution for any single person, but for the group as they talked about it, this is what makes sense. And what I see, at least from Twitter, is that there's absolutely none of that. It's like, I mean, people have said it in many ways. It's like you're just screaming into the void, or you're just like splashing comments on the wall. I don't know what it is exactly, but those particular ones, like said, like, hey, you're an asshole. Hey, this and this is like, what is this doing? Like, it feels to me like people are not really paying much attention in terms of this, of like of the cost of words actually is like, maybe it's too cheap to talk and say things like, I don't know, I don't think putting a price on words would be the solution, but just that it's just so easy. It's just so easy to say any nonsense, right? And not actually realize that, oh no, but like what, like things should lead somewhere. Like a conversation means that you're moving, or not necessarily that you have a goal and conclusion, whatever, but at least you're showing to the other person that you're participating and you're listening to them and you are making an effort to understand their position or whatever. And none of that seems to be happening in what you just mentioned, but I think in any big case, and especially this one as well, and I'm sure that's gonna be the same thing. I mean, the few things I've seen in terms of the manosphere, like you mentioned, or just comments on some YouTube videos that discuss feminism or Me Too or any of these things in any way, it's usually that. It's just really like a bunch of comments, people saying like, yeah, this, and yeah, this, and like, it's just like a string of facts, which are probably not even really facts. And my concern is that I don't see how that adds anything or leads anywhere. It just seems to be like conversation is null, and maybe maybe I don't know. Maybe it's just too easy to say nonsense.
It's it's conversation as sport. It's other people as sport. It's other people as spectacle. It's other people as object. Everyone's objectified, except maybe a few of your maybe you and a few of your friends have gone on and you kind of laugh about it in the peanut gallery, as Peyton would say, in his American way. I presume it sounds like an American.
You don't know the peanut gallery?
Yeah, I sort of do, but it sounds like it sounds like a sort of 1950s or 1930s American institution.
Well, it goes back to vaudeville, but anyway, it's an interesting one. I think, but anyway, the peanut gallery, I think, is a very good term, and basically it just refers to people who are passing judgment on something without necessarily having very much knowledge about the subject and being very vocal about their opinions. So
That's right.
I gave the example of my son giving me directions from the back seat of the car when he's only 2 years old and he has no idea where we're going. So
Yeah. They do that, young kids. It's really quite. I remember when my daughter was quite young. I think it was my daughter. Yeah, I think it was my daughter. And I said, I don't know what it was, but I was saying, don't break it. And she said, well, I'm not going to break it. And if I do break it, we'll fix it. And of course, it was an egg or something. And I said, well, we can't. If you break that, we can't fix it. Oh, yes, we can. Yes, we can. One thing that I sort of think about, and I don't have any great answers to, is I think in a lot of these situations, women get a really much worse time than men. Women announcers on TV and stuff like that. I don't know what it is. And often it's sexualized. And I suppose you can, if people want to hurl abuse at men, they'll really mainly sexualize it by implying that they're impotent or weak or something like that. And for some reason, that's much less affronting than the really nasty ones with women are kind of rape fantasy comments, horrible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what can be done. I suspect not much actually. But you've got to do what you can.
I think that
and Twitter could bloody well do what it could, but it's not doing it.
I mean, I think the filter on things just got so much worse when people started commenting online and they felt they were somewhat anonymous and they could say whatever they wanted to say.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
which is one of the things that, I doubt that Elon Musk has a very sophisticated view of most of the sort of stuff we've been talking about. He may have a more sophisticated view about what could be done with Twitter. But he talks about the idea of, making sure that accounts are properly identified and stuff like that. A rule that I use on blogs is that if people want to be anonymous, I'm much less tolerant of their comments. Whereas if they identify themselves, they get to be quite a lot nastier if they want to. And of course, they almost never do, because the ones who are nasty aren't actually. They're just taking it, just taking the car for a spin and don't tell their parents and just out to have a bit of fun by humiliating someone. Anyway.
So that's what I meant earlier when I mentioned, like, maybe it's not the right way to frame it, but when I said, like, I think words are too cheap.
I agree. Exactly, I agree.
I had this realization, like, a while ago, because I'm an architect, and I don't know, every school is different. I was trained in, like, at least the first 2-3 years, we had to draw everything. Like, drafting was like hand drawing, and you had like this so many limitations. Like, you have this finite amount of paper, you have a very finite amount of time, because drawing by hand takes a lot of time, and that makes you be extremely careful of every single line you put on that piece of paper. And then now here working in an architecture office where you can just press like 2 buttons and then you copy paste everything 1 million times, and you have like the digital drawing with, like, it's an infinite space. So I mean, it's technically not infinite. Okay, there's some memory limitations, whatever, but you could draw like 100,000 million buildings in that piece of infinite paper. Yeah, and it just kind of dawned on me, like, that makes me experiment more, that makes me try a lot of things fast because it's cheap, but at the same time I'm being a lot less careful about what I'm doing and about the meaning of every little thing I say or do in this case, which is draw. And I think it's something parallel to this is happening. I mean, in many, just because everything's getting, I guess, cheaper in the world, But especially in social media, I see this happening with language and with communication. It's just too easy to say nonsense without it having matter at all.
So the other aspect of this, we probably should wind up fairly soon.
Yeah.
But the other aspect, maybe this is a sort of teaser aspect, quite a subtle point. But when you talk about drawing, what I think about in drawing is how tacit things are, how all kinds of tacit skills are used to do it, and then communication to others takes place via all sorts of tacit means as well, and that's something which, it's a very large subject, but that's something which is getting pushed out of modern life. Tacit is slow. Tacit doesn't scale, but life doesn't exist without tacit. We're using, the tacit skills we're using in this conversation probably, I mean, it's funny to even imagine you can put numbers on them, but maybe there's 99% of what we're doing and what our brains are engaged in are things that we have no idea about. I'm moving my brain is my system is controlling the way I'm moving my arms around. I'm working out what words come before and after each other. I'm aware of some kind of relationship between me and each of you, and I'm completely. That's all managed by various things that I don't know much about. But on Twitter, there's not a lot of room for the tacit.
It's funny because I didn't use the word tacit, but I was having, a few days ago, I was talking to someone about the kind of relationship between transparency and trust.
Yes.
Which is that, there's this push for, absolute transparency. We don't have to trust anyone. That's what Bitcoin and everything is about, apparently.
Yeah.
And yet, if you push for absolute transparency, then you're eliminating the need for trust, which is something like the tacit is absolutely not scalable. You can't fake trust. It takes time. It takes trial. It takes, and it's this kind of thing that we're missing. And I mean, if you take transparency and kind of translate it into legibility or clarity, which we've been talking about, I think that's what's little bit happening in this case as well, is that we've traded clear legibility or clarity of understanding a situation right away for at the cost of sacrificing questioning and understanding and taking the time to digest all the tasks, like you said, and that I don't know what the implications are, but I think it's just a big loss to human ability and to human, capacity to actually navigate through situations and deal with complexity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good question. And it's a question that was raised. I mean, whether or not this should be, televised at all. I mean, and Nicholas, you're the expert on juries and this kind of thing. But there is that relationship, in a way, the jury is already there, and they should be there for all of us. And there's that element of trust that we have in the jury. And I don't think in particular people are particularly feeling that that's been betrayed in any case, in this particular case. But it's, obviously a few, 100 years, 200 years ago, this level of engagement just simply wouldn't have been possible. And you would have had to rely on this level of trust.
Well, I think and it is. We've lost sight of how unusual it is to allow cameras in to turn what went on in that court into sport. And a better way to think about it is that yes, it's a free country, it's a free world, and people will make sport of it, and some of them will do it in good conscience, and some of them will be as negligent about their obligations to the world as some of the nasty pieces and they're probably perfectly nice people if I met them, but in that particular behaviour, they're not really behaving very responsibly. And this is a sort of a large-scale, socially irresponsible activity, which is we're now going to make it easier. We're now going to provide all the resources for this to turn for us to get a giant peanut gallery and turn this thing into a sport. And it's not a sport. Anyway, it's this again is a sort of a left field comment, but somebody in the last week or maybe the week before tweeted something and said I was the first person he'd found writing about government and arguing that in some circumstances secret ballots in Parliament would work better than open ballots, and that's a very specific context, and I won't take you through it. But he's arguing that it's a really interesting argument that when committee meetings were opened up in Congress to the press, that the capacity for bipartisanship collapsed because all of the supervision was actually supervision not on behalf of the public, but supervision by weaponized lobby groups like the NRA, who said, we've seen you trying to do a decent deal with the Democrats to do a few decent things on guns. You know our policy is never to do anything decent on guns. Guns should be available to people like popcorn should be, and therefore parliamentarians can't do their job without getting ejected from office. So those are making Isabella's point, but in a very different context about transparency and trust.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. That's a really interesting point, and I think this is definitely something that might be interesting to explore at some future time. So, but anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, not from me.
I'm still trying to go back to that question I had before. Is like, what is the aftermath, or like, what is possibly something that could come out of this? And I mean, maybe it's too early to know, but was this a net good? I think I might agree with Nicholas when you said like, oh yeah, this televising this and making this public maybe was not. I mean, it was the right move for whoever wanted to make money out of it, but it's not the right move, I think, for public, I don't know, conscience. I don't think. Unless it opens new conversations, then that would be something different. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.